Hey there. In this lecture, we're going to execute the SQL statements that I introduced to you in the previous lecture. And that's going to set up our playground. It's going to create those tables and it's going to insert the data. So as part of this lecture, you should have access to that file that contains those SQL statements. And let me pull that file up here. And this is that file. Hopefully you didn't jump the gun in the previous lecture and typed out what was on the screen. Because there are some changes that I made, but the file that you'll see is going to be consistent with what you're seeing here in this lecture. So let's copy this first command. I'm just going to do Command C to copy this statement. And let's go to our pgadmin tool. We're going to connect to our server, which is PostgreSQL 10. Let's expand that. It's going to ask us for that password that we set up in the first, when we were installing Postgres. So that's going to be password. And I'm just going to click on Save Password so we don't have to enter it every single time when we try to connect to that server. So let's hit OK. And there we go, we're connected. Now expand this Databases tab and notice that we already have a Postgres database. This is something that comes with the application. But I don't want to create any data in this database. I want to create a new database. So right click, go to Create Database. And now we're going to title this database, we're going to call it Course Data. Okay. So we're going to be all of the tables, all of the data that we're going to be creating for this course is going to reside in this database called Course Data. So let's hit Save. And there we go. This is our database. Now what we need to do is click on this, and this allows us to connect to this database, and then go to Tools and go to Query Tool. Click on that, and this is the editor. This is where majority of our time is going to be spent in this course. We're going to be typing up the SQL commands in this top section and seeing the data output in the bottom section. Okay, so let's pull up that file. This is that file. I've already copied the first statement. Let me paste it here. Okay, so let's highlight this and hit execute. And there we go. It says create table, query returned successfully. Okay, so we were able to successfully create the table. If there was some kind of error, it wouldn't create this table and it would say, hey, there's an error. Let me show you what that error looks like. Let me just misspell these keywords and we'll call it prim key, and Postgres is going to have a problem with this. This is not the correct syntax for defining the primary key. So let me just rename this table to something else. This is going to be wrong, just so that you can see what happens when we try to execute an incorrect SQL statement. I'm going to highlight this and hit execute, and there we go. It's saying error type key does not exist, and it's pointing to the line that has the problem. And it's this prim key. It doesn't understand this line. So whenever you have issues with running SQL statements, it's important to go to this Messages tab and read what it's saying here. This is going to give a ton of information as to what could possibly be wrong with the SQL statement that you're trying to execute. But anyway, let's move on to actually inserting this data into the table that we created. So I'm going to copy all of these lines up to here. I'm going to do Command C to copy it, and let's paste it right here. And now I'm going to highlight all of these lines. We could do it line by line, but that's just such a tedious process. So I'm just going to highlight all of these lines and hit the execute button. And there we go. Notice it says query returned successfully, and it's giving that same message here in the Messages tab. So we were successfully able to insert this data. We don't see any error. So let me highlight all of this by doing Command A. That should highlight everything, and hit the delete so that we clear the screen for more commands. The next thing we're going to do is create the regions table. So let's copy this statement and paste that right here. After this, I'm also going to copy these insert statements. Okay. And I can actually highlight all of this and hit the execute, and it's going to not only create the table, but also insert the data into that table. Finally, we've got one more table. For now, we may be creating more later on in this course, but that table is the employees table. So I'm just going to highlight creating of the employee table, and then all of these insert statements, I'm going to just highlight everything in my text editor. And by the way, I'm using a text editor called Sublime Text. You can use any text editor as you please to save your queries and to, this is just a place where you can, type out things. It's not going to run in this text editor. The commands can only run in the Postgres database tool, right, which is pgadmin. But this is just a text editor that I'm using, and it's fancy. It highlights all of the keywords, and it's just easier to read. But this is the interface that we're going to be actually executing those commands in. So I copied all of those lines of code from the text editor, and now I'm going to paste them into this window. Let me just get rid of everything in this window, and now let's paste what I copied. And there we go. We've got all of the employee entries. These are all the insert statements, and then on the top we've got the create table statement. So I'm just going to highlight everything. As a matter of fact, to make my life easy, I'm just going to do Command A to highlight everything in this window, and notice it highlighted everything. And now to run this, I'm going to hit the execute button right here. And there we go. It's saying query returned successfully. So now to actually see this data, we're going to also use SQL. So don't worry about this syntax for now. I'm going to explain it in great depth as we move forward. But for now, I just want to type something on the screen and see whether we're able to retrieve that data. And so you can see what that data looks like. So don't worry about the select keyword and the from keyword. We're going to get into those details in the next lecture. But I just want to run this command and notice that this is how the data should appear. Okay. The first column is the employee ID column. And then the second column is first name, last name, email. And notice that it also gives the data type. So this column, the data type is integer. First name is a character with the length of 50. So anything with 50 characters can fit into this column. And same thing for last name, email address, hire date. Notice the data type for this is date. Okay. So this will only accept dates. If we try to put numbers or salaries or names or anything like that, it's not going to accept that into this column, right? This is a date column. This right here is a character column. Notice it allows only 17 characters. So we can't put really, really large texts or sentences in this column. And then finally, we've got a couple more columns. The gender column, notice that it only has a length of 1. So whether F for female, M for male, and then salary is an integer column. And then, of course, the region ID, this is just an integer from 1 to 7, I think, is the range. So we've created these tables. We've populated them with data. And as you can see, we can see that data by executing this SQL statement, which I'll get into those details later. One thing you need to keep in mind, and this is very, very important for any data analyst or data scientist, and that is that you must understand the data, right? There are going to be projects where you're going to be dealing with 20 tables, 50 tables, or even 100 tables. It could be more, it could be less, but you need to understand all of that data. And the way to do that is you write these kinds of select SQL statements to browse the data and understand the relationships between the tables in a given database. So before we move forward, I want to sort of give you an overview of this data so that you understand what we are working with. So let's run a similar statement to this one. I'm just going to copy this and paste it on the next line. But instead of browsing employees, I'm going to browse through regions. Okay, so you can see that data. Now, before I execute regions, go all the way to the right. Notice this region ID column in the employees table. If you move your cursor up and down, you can see the different values in this column. We've got values such as 3, 4, 7, 5, 1, 6, 7, 2, 3. So it's all repeating from 1 to 7. Okay. this region ID exists in the regions table as well. So let me show you what that is. Let me run this statement right here. I highlighted it and then hit the execute button. And notice that this is our regions table. And notice that the region ID is from 1 to 7. So these are all the regions. So basically in the employees table, we are forming a relationship with the regions table by referencing the region ID in the employees table so that we can see which employee works for which region. Now we've got 1,000 employees. These are the regions in which they will be working. So these employees could be in Northeast United States, Central Asia, East Asia. Every single employee works for any one of these 7 regions. So there's a relationship between employees and regions. Now, coming over to the departments table, let me execute a similar statement for departments. And let's highlight this and hit execute. So we've got 24 departments in total. All right. If you remember, when we created the employees table, one of the columns that we created was the department column so that we can track which employee works for which department. So if we run this employees query again, this SQL statement, if I hit the execute button, it's going to bring up that employees table, and you'll see that we've got the department column. So Barry works for the sports department. Ariel works for tools. Sydney works for clothing, and so on. But you'll see if you browse around in these departments, there's going to only be 24 departments in total, right? That's what we saw in the departments table. There are only 24 of them. So these employees are assigned to these departments. Each employee is going to work for one particular department. It could be any one of those 24 departments. Further details about the department is captured in the departments table. Details about the different regions are captured in the regions table. Details about the employees is captured in the employees table. So you wouldn't see employee salary or employee hire date in the regions table, right? That information should be in the employees table. Similarly, the division that a particular department belongs in, that's not going to be, information that belongs anywhere else except for the departments table. So this is the relationship between these 3 tables. The employees have a particular department that they work in, and they belong in a particular region, okay? And it could be any one of these 7 regions. All right, so hopefully I've provided enough of an overview for you to understand this data and these tables and what type of data they contain. Go ahead and execute these statements that I have here on the screen, in your own pgadmin tool, and browse around this data to understand it, because in the coming lectures, we're going to get into all of the juicy details on how to analyze all of this data and get critical insight, by joining these tables together and running these kinds of select statements. And this is just the beginning, right? I just introduced you to this select statement. I haven't explained anything else regarding it. So in the next lecture, we're going to dive deep into the select statement, and about 80% of your work as a data scientist or data analyst in a database, it's going to be involving the select statement. Right now, we just see 3 lines here. These are simple select statements, but this can become very, very complex. Don't worry, by the time you're done with this course, nothing in the select statement is going to be confusing to you. You would have mastered it, and you'd have mastered the art of extracting critical insight from data using SQL. So stay tuned. I'll see you in the next lecture.